Hello guys, welcome to my channel Analytics with Ashish. So in this video I'm going to give you a theoretical overview of how we deploy our machine learning model or machine learning pipeline. Okay, so generally, like whenever we have machine learning model, it's not just a model, actually it's basically a pipeline. What is pipeline? Pipeline is basically a sequence of different steps. So for example, like you do your data registration, like if you're using Azure ML, then you need to register your data before processing. So you can do your data registration, then you can do your data pre-processing, okay, where you are identifying the missing values, you are doing normalization, for example. Like then next step is feature engineering, or maybe like you're creating new features from the existing features. You are doing feature selection, just giving an idea that there can be multiple steps which you can do, which you want to perform every time whenever you are so what happened, the best part of this is like you next time whenever you want to change your data, you will just change your data and then the same steps will follow. You don't need to redo everything. Actually, you will just pass this and then it will be going through this each steps. And if you have problem with any of the steps, then you know like where to go. So then do you have model building? Just I'm pointing some very basic and very common steps. So model building, and then you need to evaluate your model performance, and then once suppose you are satisfied with your model, then you take it to the deployment, and then you basically create a score script to get the model output. So basically this is ML pipeline. And what actually happened with this, so once you deploy it manually, like you created a score script, you deploy it, basically when you deploy it, you will get the end URL, and in this score script you will be calling these end URL, and then you will be getting the output. So if this entire thing is in your Azure ML SDK or in your Jupyter notebook where you're calling different libraries, okay, and then for example, like your model is about predicting salary, and the features which you have used in your model is suppose it is age, number of experience, and say education level. So these three variables, so like you will be passing these inputs. Suppose the age is 30, experience is 5 years, and then education level, suppose like it is bachelor level, okay. And then once you pass, then you will be getting the approximate salary of 80,000, suppose that is coming. So that you will be getting. So this kind of interface is programmer friendly, because it is just to test you that your model is working fine, but it is not like user friendly. So for that purpose only, like what we do actually, we create a user interface, which can be easily understandable from any other person who does not have ability to understand these details, these model details. So for that, what we create front end. Front end is basically like using different HTML, CSS. So here, for example, we will create 3 different boxes. So in our case, suppose it is age, experience, and education, then we will be creating those different different boxes, and then when user will be entering these inputs, and then they will be getting the salary. So for this, we have 2 things. We have front end, and then we have back end. So for the back end, actually, like we have a different framework. So the job of this framework is basically to use this model which we have deployed, and then give the output actually. So for that, we have a different framework. For example, like Flask, we have Streamlit. You see, this is the same thing, but we are just creating a nice framework, user interface, which we can see or test the same thing which we have done here. The same thing we can test here. Okay, so the Flask and Streamlit, you can try to understand this with a simple library. So Streamlit is a library, Flask is a library, so you can import those libraries in your notebook, and then you can use all those functions which are inside that library. So basically this is the main purpose of these framework which we are going to use. Okay, so now suppose once you have everything here which is running fine, you are able to create a nice front end and back end, and everything is working fine. But still, like, this is everything is working locally. It is all working locally in your computer. So if someone else wants to access this thing, they are not able to access it. And to make it publicly accessible, we need to take it to a global network. And now that can be your Azure or AWS or GCP, so that once you take this thing to here, then it can become publicly accessible to all the people if you want. And the process of making moving from here to here, that is basically deployment. Okay, so from local machine to this server, moving this from here to here, that is basically deployment, so that whenever the external person they want to access, they will be making the call here, and then they will be getting the output here. So let's understand this more into detail, like how do we, like, move this thing to this thing here. So just try to imagine this, that whenever everything is working fine in your local computer, and if you want your friend to test it in his computer or in her computer, then you need to recreate that same environment, because something which is working fine in your computer, they might not work in their computer because they don't have the same library or same environment. So that's why we need to zip the entire environment, and then we need to put it into a box. You can imagine like that actually, and then you transfer that box to your friend, or then maybe to a different server. And that box is basically Docker. So Docker is just a software which gives you this ability that you can box, and then it helps you to ship this box from this location to the location where you want to ship it. In our case, it is a global network. So in Docker file, there are, so basically like all the files which you have, so like you always have a working folder, right? Where you have different PY files, different HTML files, because you have created that interface, CSS file suppose, and then you also need to create there can be more files. I'm just giving example, and then you need to add one Docker file. So Docker file is basically a sequence of steps. So for example, like when you order a table or chair, right, and then they put all the different pieces into the box, and then also give you the instruction that how to install that. So in Docker file is that instruction guide, so it will tell you like what to do in a sequential way, like the step number 1 is this, the step number 2 is this, the step number 3 is this, and then you just follow that, and then in the end you will have a you can organize your chair, or table. So the same way you can you are giving that instruction in Docker file. Docker file is nothing but just run first this, then run this, then run this piece. There is something like expose. You can expose your port, or the port where you want to run that thing, and then again that different thing. And for example, like in the end there is like command, and then you can say that okay, use Python, and then suppose your application, the main function is in this application file, so app.py. So something like this, just giving an example. So this is basically an instruction guide. Now you can pass this to anyone, or like you can use the other one, and then you can modify it according to your needs. So it's a recipe which you are creating or using or modifying, and then basically the point is you are going to tell this to server like, okay, once you have all this thing, so the way to make it work, you need to follow these instructions. Here one more important thing is that requirement.txt, which is basically the detail of all the packages which you have or which you need to run all these applications, and you need to install those packages in this machine here. So once you transfer everything from here to the server, then, so for example, like let's take an example of Azure in this case. So we created a Docker file in our local folder. So we created, so like we have all these things which we can call like so we have everything here, and now we need to move this to, suppose we are taking example of Azure. So in Azure we can create a Azure Container Registry, ACR, and then basically we create we zip this everything. Suppose that is our Docker image, and then we move this Docker image to our ACR, Azure Container Registry. And now the same thing, like it was running locally in your computer, you can do the same thing, and then you can check if it is running locally in ACR. So you can test it, and if it is working fine, then you can create a different resource, a new resource called Azure Web App, and you link this Azure Web App with your Azure Container Registry, and then if everything is working fine, then you should be able to access your everything which you have created here. That should be able to run here in Azure Web Apps using those endpoint or those URL which you have created while creating the Azure Web App. So you just need to put those public URL, and then it can be accessed by any client or any users. They can give the input and they will be getting output. For example, in our case, the input was age, education, experience, and output will be the salary, so you will be getting right access. So I hope this was clear. I hope it's not very confusing. If it is, let me know, and I will be giving more explanation on that in maybe in the next video. So maybe we will be taking one step at a time, because each step in this is more detailed steps, and then we can take a separate video for each of the step to understand more in detail. But this is just an overview of entire process. So we have Azure Machine Learning Pipeline, which is a series of different steps, and then we can test everything working locally, and then once we import, we get the output. Then to make it like nice user interface friendly, we create HTML, and that is front end, and for backend we use Flask, Streamlit, or anything else we can use, and then we move it from there. Now if you want to make it available for all the other person to access without installing locally in their computer, so for that we need to pass this to the global network. For that we use different cloud services, and then so that's basically the process from local machine to the server. How do we move it? We basically like make it we transfer the entire environment, we zip it, and then we put it like in a box. Like you can visualize in such a way, and that box is taken care by a Docker image or a software called Docker. For example, like we have FedEx, right? We want to transfer anything, then we use service of FedEx, and then we have FedEx box, so that's a Docker. And then like suppose this is in our local environment everything, and now we need to create our instruction guide, which is Docker file, and then which is just set of instruction, and then you move this from your local to Azure CER, Azure Container Registry, and then if it is working fine from local to here, you can test it here one time, and then if it is working fine, then again you give a nice user interface by creating Azure web application, and then from there client can access your model. So I hope it helps. If it helps, thank you.